All right, I will say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning share. To thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsor, the Filson Mishpacha of Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the Sherman Drushos this year as a zechus for Besaros Tovos for Am Yisrael. Talmud Torah sponsors of the month of Tammuz, Habo Aleinu Latova, Aaron and Alana Weinberg. And thanks to Hashem for all of his nisim, both the revealed and the hidden, for the miracle of Yonatan Shai Weinberg 14 years ago, for Besaros Tovos for Am Yisrael, for Eretz Yisrael, and the merit of the speedy arrival of Mashiach. Daniel and Batsheva Pava of Eretz Yisrael, in creation of the second year to the Batsheva's father, Reb Shlomo Aryeh ben Yehuda Aryeh Vei of Philadelphia, was a child survivor of Auschwitz, who was zocha to leave over 100 descendants at the time he left this world. Our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Tali and Michelle Strum, Le'ilu Nishmas, Tali's mother on the occasion of her second yahrzeit, Brindel Miriam Bas Menachem Meir, and Moshe Devorah Wordesheim in memory of Moshe's father, Mordechai ben Moshe, on the occasion of his yahrzeit. We open that of the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah, the families in Nechama, all of those who need a refuah shabbat together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. Kodesh Baruch Hu Shnei Meretz Hashem, bring home our hostages b'shalom and b'karav. Shall allow our holy soldiers to be successful. B'chol ma'aseh yedayim, and the coming week should just bring bracha and besaros tovos for all of Am Yisrael. But with that, let us begin. Baruch Hashem. A great zechus to be able to continue another week in Maseches Avoda Zara. So today's daf is Chav Hey 25, and we are picking up on Chav Daled Amud Beis, Shkach Torah Richter for yesterday's shir and last week's shiurim as well. So we are picking up Amarav, 2 lines up from the bottom. Amarav. So we'll see some really interesting gemaras ahead of us today. Sorry. Good. The Gemara says this also. Amarav, Kiman Karo Parsoi L'Safra Dvir. So why is it that the Persians call a sefer a devir? Again, I'm about to say this is a continuation of yesterday's daf a little bit as well. The Gemara says, because of here, based on the pasuk, V'shem devir lifnim kiryas sefer. So an interesting play on words over here, that the name of devir was kiryas sefer. Okay, so sefer, devir, good. Amr kaman karu parsai lenida dashtana. Why is it that the Persians call a nida a dashtana? The Gemara says, Mihacha, Kiderech Noshim Li. It's a little bit of a contraction of words. Kiderech Noshim Li. Literally, again, this is by when Lavan was chasing after Yaakov Avinu ran away. And remember, Rachel had stolen the idols, so Lavan was searching everyone's stuff. And Rachel Imenu said, "I can't get up." Kiderech Noshim Li. So Derech Noshim Dashtana, a little bit of a contraction. Top of Chav Hey. So we'll say, so now we're going to come to some very interesting, beautiful Gemara. Vayidom Hashemesh V'Yareach Amad Ad Yukum Goy Avav. So the Gemara quotes the pasuk from Yoshua. Now this is the battle of Ai, one of the incredible battles that Yoshua waged upon entry into Eretz Yisrael was in the battle of Ai. Now there was a tremendous miracle that happened there, in that the sun did not set until Yoshua had fully vanquished his enemies. That's this pasuk, Vayidom Hashemesh. So it literally translates. If you look at Rashi says over here, Vayidom Hashemesh. B'Yoshua ksiv kishanilcham im chamesh hamlochim hatzorim ala givonim. So literally, Vayidom Hashemesh. We see the word Vayidom, right? Where else have we seen the word Vayidom? By Aaron HaKohen, right? So Vayidom literally means to remain silent. In this context, what it really means is to remain still. So Vayidom Hashemesh, the sun remained still. V'yareach amad ad yukum goy ayvav. And literally, again, the moon stayed in its place. In other words, the sun remained still, silent. It remained in the sky, and the moon did not move into its position. Ad yukum goy ayvav, until ultimately, again, we were able to take revenge on our enemies. Halohik ksuva, al sefer hayashar. This is written in the sefer hayashar. So the Gemara says, okay, what does this mean? My Sefer Hayashar, what does this mean? So just understand what happened over here. There's 2 things that's happening in this pasuk. The pasuk number 1 is describing the incredible miracle that occurred, that the sun remained in the sky until Yoshua completely finished his conquest. That's miracle 1. The other piece that's piece of information 1. The other piece of information that is being conveyed is that this miracle was foretold to us in the Sefer Hayashar. So the Gemara says, what's Sefer Hayashar? Like, I know that I didn't learn Tanakh growing up, but I'm pretty sure, right, there is no book called Sefer HaYashar. So what is that? So the Gemara says, my Sefer HaYashar, Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Zeh Sefer Avram Yitzchak V'Yakov Shenikru Yesharim. So Sefer HaYashar, interestingly enough, refers to the book of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, who are called Yesharim. Now we'll say, what's the book of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? What's the book? The book ultimately, again, is Sefer Bereshis. Sefer Bereshis is called Sefer Yesharim. We'll say, it's so incredible. One of the most beautiful things about Eretz Yisrael, whenever we learn things every day, Baruch Hashem, there's such a difference when you're learning something and you're in the land where it all happened. Like, it's crazy. Now you could drive right to Hebron, no problem, right? Because there's a new bypass road. I think, to drive to, when you used to go to Hebron, like you had to go through some pretty, what's the right word? Sketchy neighborhoods. They're sketchy for now. They won't be sketchy for long, Emir Hashem. But you have to go through some sketchy neighborhoods. Now it's incredible. They have this bypass road. You could literally drive straight, 45 minings, less than 40, depending on how fast you drive. Right, 40 minutes from Yerushalayim to, and you think about, so we're just there. We weren't sure we were going to make it. And then I said to my wife, I said, how I remember I always hear the words of like Reb Simcha Hachmam, how do you come to Eretz Yisrael without saying hello to your parents? How do you come to Eretz Yisrael without saying? So for us, it was saying good, we had to say goodbye, but incredible. Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, to be able to, and it was incredible. Mas Machpelah was absolute. It was empty. I don't know. I don't know what it was. I guess we were also there like in the middle of the day. Absolutely empty. I have to say, I felt bad for the Avos and Imos that Mas Machpelah was empty, but selfishly, I was very happy. Although there were a group of women and they were like squatters. They would not move. I could not get into Avram and Zara. Baruch Hashem, right? I had to daven on the outside for them, but incredible. In any event, so Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. What's the Sefer Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? That's the Sefer Yesharim. Shenikru Yesharim, Shneimar, Tamos Nafshi Mos Yesharim. They both say incredible. Now, it's fascinating, right? Where is this from? If you don't know where it's from, you were making Kiddush during laning yesterday, right? In other words, this is from, incredible. I thought we had it yesterday. Lauren and I were just talking about this. How incredible is it that both Shabbos of Parshas Bilam, all right, and the Sunday after Parshas Bilam, Parshas Balak, right? So ultimately, again, Tamos Nafshi Mos Yisharim. This is at the end when Bilam realizes that he's unable to curse the Jewish people. So he says, let me die a death of the upright. Who's the upright? Who's the Yesharim? That's Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So therefore, again, the Gemara says, so now we're supposed to just watch what's happening over here. So the Navi says that when the sun stood still for Yoshua, this was a miracle that was alluded to in Sefer Yesharim. What's Sefer Yesharim? That's Sefer Bereshis. Who are the Yesharim? The Yesharim are Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. That's the Yesharim. Rabbi say, but I just want to point out, out of all the accolades, right? They're not called tzaddikim. They're called Yesharim. Rabbi say, what's a Yashar? What does Yashar literally mean? Straight. So what does it mean when someone's straight? What it means is that ultimately, again, they don't veer. Do you know the godless of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? That no matter what was happening in life, they stayed true to their path. A lot of people are tzaddikim, but you could be a tzaddik without being a yashar. You can't be, right? But to be a yashar is the highest level. To be a yashar means you are so ridiculously committed to something bigger than yourself that you stay the path no matter what comes your way. Let's say, how many of us have started on certain pathways in life, and then what happens? This challenge comes, this obstacle comes, and so we, change course. We change course, right? And if you kind of look at the map of our life, it's been so circuitous all over the place. Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, no matter what was happening in their life, they were committed to a path, and nothing could make them forsake it. That's a yashar. So the Gemara says as follows. So now what the Navi was saying is that the miracle of the sun remaining in the sky for Yoshua is somehow alluded to in Bereshis. Where is it alluded to? So the Gemara says, ultimately, his offspring will be Melo HaGoyim, will be known amongst the nations. When will Yaakov, when will his descendants be known amongst all of the nations? So Rabbi said, this is incredible, this is fascinating. When did the whole world know about the greatness of Yaakov Avinu's offspring? When? When the sun stood still for Yoshua. Why? Because when the sun stood still for Yoshua, said, guess what? Everyone knew about it because there's only one sun, right? There's only one sun. So when the sun stood still, the whole world was like, what's going on over here? And they quickly understood what was happening. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was performing a miracle for the children of Yaakov Avinu. So that moment of that we say in Bereshit, Zara Yihye Melo Hagoyim, that his greatness will be known amongst all of the nations. This is by the brachos of Yaakov to Ephraim and Menashe. Right? So ultimately, again, when will his greatness become known? Remember, Yoshua was a member of the tribe of Ephraim. So ultimately, again, here Yaakov Avinu is saying that Ephraim will be great, he will be known amongst all the nations. When was Ephraim known amongst all the nations? When the sun stood still for Klal Yisrael, when we conquer Eretz Yisrael. V'yamar Hashesh bechatz, the Gemara says, B'shah she'amdo lochama liYoshua, v'yamar Hashemesh bechatz yashamayim, v'lo'atz lavo kiyom tamim. So Rabbi says, so now what's fascinating about this is, now say to yourself, why, like, what's the pshat with this? Why do we need this miracle? Why do we predict it in Sefer Bereshis? Because Rabbi says it's important to understand something very fundamental. Am Yisrael's success is not an if, it's just a when. It's just a when. It's just about how the success plays out. How do I know this? Because the success itself is predicted in the Chumash. The Chumash is something eternal. Torah is something eternal. So the success of Klal Yisrael, what here's the Gemara's pointing out, is the success of Yoshua, the sun remaining in its place till Klal Yisrael conquered its enemies. That's already in Bereshis. If it's in Bereshis, then what does that tell you? It's an immutable truth. Anything that is in the Torah is an immutable truth. So since the success of Klal Yisrael is in the Torah Kedusha, by definition, it becomes an immutable truth. Incredible. So Moshe says, V'kamo, how long did the sun remain standing in the sky that day? In other words, how much extra daylight was there? Amr Rabbi Shimon Levi, Esrim v'arba shoy. The sun actually remained in the sky for 24 hours. The Gemara says, Azal shis, v'kam shis. Literally, again, it followed its normal progression for 6 hours. It stayed in its place for 6 hours. Azal shis, v'kam shis. It's traveled another 6 hours, remained and then remained in its place for another 6 hours. After that, kula milsa kiyom tamim. And sakakol, right, in total, it remained in the sky for 24 hours. Rabbi Elazar says, shloshim v'shis. No, it remained in the sky for 36 hours. The Gemara says, Azal Shis, it traveled for 6 hours, V'kam Tresar, and stood in its place for 12 hours. Azal Shis, V'kam Tresar, traveled another 6 hours and stayed in its place for 12 hours. Amidasa Kiyom Tamim, ultimately again remained in place for an entire day. An entire day plus, right, 36 hours. First wide line, Rabbi Shlomo Nachmani Amar, Arbim Ushmona, it stood in place for 48 hours. 48 hours. Azal Shis v'kam Tresar. So again, traveled for 6 hours, remained in place for 12 hours. Azal Shis v'kam Esim v'arba. Traveled another 6 hours, then remained in place for 24 hours. Shneimar v'lo'atz lavo kiyom tamim. Mechlal d'meikara lav kiyom tamim haba. Se'igid da'amri b'tosefta pligi. Others say, again, halacha l'maisa, they were arguing on the additional amount that the sun remained in its place. Yoshua Levi Omer Esim v'arba. So again, Rabbi Yoshua says an extra 24 hours. Azal Shis v'kam Tresar. Azal Shis v'kam Tresar. Amidas kiyom tamim. Says just repetition of what we just said before. Rabbi Elazar Omer Shloshim Sheish stayed in the sky for 36 hours. Gemara says, Azal Shis v'kam Tresar, Azal Shis v'kam Esrim v'arba v'lo'atz lavo kiyom tamim. Rabbi Shlomo Nachmani Amar, Aram Ushmona, 48 hours. Azal Shis v'kam Esrim v'arba, Azal Shis v'kam Chavdalit. Makish Amidasa l'bi'aso. And ultimately, again, it equates, or the Navi equates, well, literally, again, Amidasa l'bi'aso, the amount of time that it remained in place to the amount of time it traveled. Mabi asa kiyom tamim, just like it traveled ultimately an entire day. Ap amidasa kiyom tamim, so too it stayed in place an entire day as well. I will say, what's fascinating about this? So it's incredible that the sun remained in its place for this a prolonged amount of time. Why did the sun remain in its place for a prolonged amount of time? Why? Right? So Yoshua could fight. So we'll say, what's incredible about this? What's incredible about this? That they fought continuously either for 24 hours, 36 hours, or 48 hours. What do you see from this? What do you see from this? That when you are mission-driven in life, you could overcome even internal basic fatigue. That sometimes when we get tired and we give up, that's because we're not mission-driven enough. Now, obviously, this is miraculous. I'm not suggesting any of us could handle, 12 hours, 36 hours, 48 hours, but it's a tremendous idea. Remember, Yoshua was focused on a mission. When you live a mission-driven life, you don't fall asleep at the wheel. I know that this is a great lesson to learn on a fast day. When it's like, oh my gosh, it's 8:30 and I'm running on fumes already, right? Because I just need that coffee. But again, it is a tremendous Moshe Haskell. They fought. I'll say, I just want to point out, they fought, and this is Eretz Yisrael is only conquered. Eretz Yisrael is only conquered if you are a mission-driven nation. The objectives in life are only accomplished if you are a mission-driven person. Life is all about what is my mission. Do you know how many of us go through life and we don't have a mission? Right? What are we doing? I don't know. Like, what am I doing? I'll see, as they say, Ma yovo yom. I'll see what the day brings. Well, I'll do whatever I have to do. No, you can't live life like that. What's your mission? What's your tachlis? What's your purpose? Whether it's a daily purpose, a weekly purpose, a monthly purpose, a yearly purpose, a lifelong purpose, what's your mission? Because without mission, you're going to live a life of lethargy. A life of lethargy. Many people, the title of their biography is Life of Lethargy, right? Always tired, always fashlufen, always this, right? Other people, right? If you want to live a life of lethargy, okay, so don't have a mission. But if you want to live a life of alacrity, a life of zrizos, a life of islavos, a life where you could fight 24, 36, 48 hours, you got to figure out what's your mission. Where there is mission, there is energy. Where there is no mission, there is lethargy. Let's go back there. So the Gemara says as follows. So, Tana, Kishem sha'amdu lo chama leYoshua, kach amda lo chama leMoshe, Ben Gurion. So interesting, the Gemara says there are three people for whom the sun stood still for, right? So the same way so Yoshua, that's what we just saw, it also stood still for Moshe and for Nakdim Ben Gurion. So Yoshua cry. So Yoshua, we just saw the psukim. Nakdim Ben Gurion, we'll say, what's Nakdim Ben Gurion? Gemara. So we'll say, Rashi quotes this story. This is the story of Maseches Tainus, right? This is Nakdim Ben Gurion. There was a drought. He went ahead and he leased wells for Klal Yisrael, right? And remember, again, he made a deal with a Roman official that he will repay, if it doesn't rain and the wells aren't replenished by so-and-so date, he'll repay him an exorbitant amount of money. Day came, there was no rain. Nakdim Ben Gurion davened. Ultimately, tremendous rain fell and refilled the wells. The Roman official said, too late. Too late. Why? Look, it's already dark outside. Nakdim Ben Gurion davened, and the clouds dispersed, and the sun was out. The sun was out. So Nakdim Ben Gurion had his own sun miracle. LeMoshe Minolon. But where do we know that from Moshe Rabbeinu the sun stood still? Where is that from? Asya achel ksiv hacha achel seis pachtecha uksiv Yoshua achel gadlacha. So Gzer Shava achel by Moshe and by Yoshua. Just interesting. For both, I just want to point out something fascinating. This is a Gzer Shava from Moshe to Yoshua, from Yoshua to Moshe, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Yoshua, Achel Gadlacha, I will amplify your greatness. Ultimately, he's used the same lashon by Moshe. So just like by Yehoshua, the sun stood still for Yoshua, so too by Moshe, the sun stood still by Moshe. Which I just want to show you the incredible nature of that limud, right? We're learning from the Talmud to the Rebbe, right? Just like by Yoshua, the sun stood still, so too the same lashon as used by Yoshua, by Moshe, the sun stood still as well. Rabbi Yochanan says, Asya, taste. Another Gzer Shav, Ksiv Hacha, Achel says, Pachtecha, says by Moshe Rabbeinu, I will put your fear on the nations. Uksiv Yoshua, biyom seis Hashem es Hamori. Okay? Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani amar megufei dekra shameslei. Eshe yishmu'un shim'acha v'ragzu v'chelu mipanecha. The pasuk says in Dvarim that the nations will hear about your greatness and your fear will be upon them. When will they fear you? When the sun stood still for Moshe Rabbeinu as well. So both say, interestingly enough, the Gemara highlights, although we do not find this explicit in a pasuk, but the Gemara tells us that the sun stood still for Moshe Rabbeinu as well. So basically, is the kasha v'lo haya kiyom hahu lefanav u'la'acharav. Here's the Pranabos say in Sefer Yoshua, when the Navi talks about this incredible miracle that the sun remained in the sky. What does the pasuk say? There was never a day like this before it or after it, which indicates to us that there was never another miracle like this, where the sun stood still in the sky. So what's happening? So it sounds like this was a unique, singular miracle by Yoshua, and not done by anyone else. So what's the pshat? So the Gemara says, "Ibai sema shaus hudelo havu nafishi kulehai." So one possibility is you're right. By Yoshua, the sun remained in place for the longest amount of time. In other words, for other people like Moshe Rabbeinu and Akdim Ben Gurion, the sun remained in place. It did, but for others, ultimately, again, it remained. For Yoshua, it remained in place for a prolonged amount of time. For others, it remained in place, but not as long. The Ibab said the other possibilities. Interesting. Avni barad lo hayu. Yoshua didn't just have the sun remain in place. Yoshua got the platinum package. In other words, this was sun remaining in place and hail falling down upon his enemies as well. Dechsev vahi benusam mipnei bnei Yisrael heimamor beis Charon v'Hashem hishlich aleim avonim gidolos mina shamayim ad azeka vayamusu. That when the enemies of Yoshua, enemies of Klal Yisrael, were running away, they were stricken down by large hailstones. So in that respect, Yoshua's miracle was different. It had the sun and the hailstones. Moshe and Akdim Ben Gurion had the sun, but they didn't have the hailstones. Ksiv vayomer. Vayomer l'lamid b'nei Yehuda keshas hine ksuva al sefer hayashar. Shabbos say another beautiful pasuk over here. So by Shmuel Beis, the pasuk says, "Vayomer l'lamid b'nei Yehuda keshas hine ksuva al sefer hayashar." Literally, we will teach b'nei Yehuda keshas, the art of the bow, and this is written on sefer hayashar. Shabbos say, so what is this? If you take a look at the first wide line of Rashi, Rashi is l'lamid b'nei Yehuda keshas b'kina shekonin David al Shaul. Shabbos says, so amazingly enough, this was, remember, when Shaul died, David delivered a eulogy. Now, remember again, David was Shaul's son-in-law. Now, if you think you don't get along with your father-in-law, right? So remember again, he might dislike you immensely, right? But, Lemaisa, most probably, none of us have a father-in-law who tried to kill us. Might have thought about it, right? But Lamaisa, right? Never acted upon it. So remember, David HaMelech had this crazy relationship with his father-in-law, where Shaul became convinced that David was trying to steal the throne from him. David HaMelech would not confront, he would not engage in confrontation with his father-in-law. That's why I mentioned on Shabbos, part of the beauty when you go to En Gedi, right? Those caves, that's where David, that region, that area, that's where David hid. Right? He could have raised an army, and he could have taken the crown remember, he didn't even have to take the crown. The crown was his. David HaMelech was already anointed by Shmuel. He was the anointed king. But even the fact that he was anointed, he would not raise a sword against his father-in-law. Instead, he chose to live like a nomad, literally like a nomad in the desert. In the desert. That was David HaMelech. So therefore, when Shaul died, David eulogized him. And he says, "Vayomer l'lamid b'nei Yehuda keshas." This was part of the eulogy that Shaul was the one who taught b'nei Yehuda to use the bow. This was written on Sefer Hayashar. My Sefer Hayashar. What's the Sefer Hayashar? Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Zeh Sefer Avram Yitzchak v'Yakov shenikru Yisharim. Once again, I will say Sefer Hayashar is always a reference to Sefer Bereshis. Sefer Bereshis, the book of the Avos, because Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are called the Yashar, the straight path. Dichsiv behu Tamos nafshi mos yisharim utia acharisi kamahu ve'echaramiza. So we'll say, so where is this notion? Where is this notion of Yehuda, Bnei Yehuda, using the bow? Where is this referenced ultimately in Bereshis? So this is very interesting. Yehuda, this in Parshas Vayechi. Yehuda, ata yorucha achecha, yadecha ba'oref oivecha. So we'll say the pasuk. This is literally again in the brachas that Yaakov Avinu is giving his children on the deathbed. Yehuda ata yoducha achecha, right? Yehuda, your brothers know you, or you are known amongst your brothers. Yodcha ba'oref oivecha. Your hand is literally, again, ba'oref. We'll say, what's the oref? The oref is the back of the neck, right? The nape, the back of the neck. Your hand is on the back of the neck of your enemies. Yad chabar evavecha. So I'll say, by the way, I just want to point out, why does it say your hand is on the back of the neck of your enemies, as opposed to like your hand is on the neck of your enemies? What does it mean if your hand is on the back of the neck of your enemies? What does it mean? What does it mean? Your enemies are running away. Your enemies are running away. What does Yehuda do when your enemies are running away? Sometimes even when your enemies are running away, you have to catch them and defeat them where they are. Because if they run away, then what happens? They live to fight another day. They live to fight another day. Silber say, you know what's so interesting about the times that we're living in is, we're so used to understanding that what's the goal of the Jew? What's the goal of the Jew? Throughout history, what's the goal of the Jew been? Survival. It's been survival, right? That's what it is. It's about survival. And we've forgotten that Jews have a different destiny than survival. You know what it's called? It's called victory. It's called victory. For us, right, we are living in times where the Jew need not content himself with survival, but we actually have the ability to emerge the victor. For 2,000 years, the Jew, victory, right? The Jew that has not been in the Jewish vernacular victory. Survival is great. Survival is great. And it's incredible. Yaakov Avinu says to his children, says to Yehuda, no. The destiny of the Jew is not survival. The destiny of the Jew is victory. And when your enemies turn around and run away, catch them and vanquish them. Because if you don't, you will continue to face the same threat day after day after day. It's incredible. And it's incredible to see how we are living in times where this shift in Jewish thinking is literally occurring right in front of us. Incredible. So the Gemara goes, now what is, now interesting enough, the way the Gemara understands it over that, now, but I just told you it's Pashup shot, that Yehuda's hand is on the nape of the nape of the neck of his enemy. But what kind of warfare requires your hand opposite the back of your neck? Have Omer zu keshas. That's the use of a bow. And what's the pshat? Because like when you pull a bow back, remember again, you're not pulling a bow from here, you're pulling a bow from here. So really, right, your backhand is opposite the nape of your neck. So using a bow, that's that type of warfare. The Gemara says, Rabbi Loza says, Zu Sefer Mishnah Torah. No, Sefer Yesharim actually is not Bereshis. Just going back. But rather, again, Sefer Yesharim is actually Chumash Devarim. Why is it called Sefer Yesharim? V'amai karlu Sefer Yashar, d'chsev v'asisa hayashar v'atov b'nei Hashem. Because the pasuk says, you shall do the yashar the tov. So again, there's a mitzvah. V'asisa hayashar v'atov, which Rabbi say, by the way, now makes so much more sense. I've always struggled with saying, what does it mean, Vasisa hayashar v'hatov? What does it mean to do that which is yashar in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Now we understand. We understand from Avram Yitzchak and Yaakov, are called yesharim. Yashar means live a mission-driven life. Be committed to a higher principle and don't veer. Don't get directed. Don't get lost in the journey of life, but stay on course. Yadav Rav Lo. What's the type of warfare that needs two hands? Have Omer Zu Keshas. Right? A bow requires two hands. Shobar Nachmani Omar Zeh Sefer Shoftim. No, Sefer Yashar is actually the book of Shoftim. Judges, Navi. La'amai Karlu Sefer Yashar. Why do you call it Sefer Yashar? D'chsev Bayomim Haim a Melech B'Yisrael. Ish Hayashar Be'inav Yaseh. In those days, there was no king. Everyone did what they want. So where do we find a reference to Yehuda's bow? L'mandas doros b'nei Yisrael lamda melchama. So Klal Yisrael be taught to do melchama. Ve'izah melchama shetzricha limud. What type of warfare requires education? Omer zu keshas. A bow. So right, a bow is a more sophisticated form of warfare. Requires a bit more education. I mean, Nalan to be Yehuda ksiv. I know that it's written by Yehuda. The ksiv miyala lano betchila ala knani v'ilachim ba vayomer Hashem Yehuda yala. As the pasuk says, who will go up first to fight the Knani? Hakadosh Baruch Hu said it will be Yehuda. Incredible. So we'll say, let's go weiter. Vayaram atalach hasashok va'alel vayasem lifnei Shaul. So we'll say, it's not going back. It's interesting. Not that the Gemara just quoted the pasuk by the eulogy of Shaul. The Gemara actually goes back to the beginning of the Shaul story, when Shaul was first anointed by Shmuel. So remember again, Shaul, like many kings of Israel, did not, like David, did not want to be king. So Shmuel ordered, so he invited Shaul to a feast, and he ordered the cook. He ordered the cook to give Shaul the nicest piece of meat. Which piece of meat did he give Shaul? So he ordered the cook, he ordered the butcher to give Shaul the shok. The shok, I will say, is the thigh. Ha'aleha, that which is on top of it. So that's a gezunta piece of meat to Shaul. The Gemara says, what does it mean v'ha'aleha? What does it mean that which is on top of it? Rabbi Yochanan says, shok va'alya, means the shok, the thigh, and the tail. The tail, my va'aleha. So the Gemara says, my va'aleha, this the misamcha shok la'alya, because the thigh bone supports the tail. So that's why it's called va'aleha. That's what's on top of it. Rabbi Lazar Omer shok v'chazeh. It means the shok. It means the thigh, or the leg and the chest. My va'aleha. The mochis la lechazeh uluya. He placed the chest. The butcher placed the chest on top of the thigh. Okay, the Gemara says. I'm sorry. The mochis lechazeh iluya the shok. Ki boy anufe menafile. Because when they do tenufa, when they do a waving of this portion of the Beis Hamikdash, they place the chest on top of the thigh. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani Omer shok v'shofi. So it means the shok, the thigh, and the cap of the thigh bone. My va'ala shofi iluya de shokai, because the cap of the thigh bone is on top of the thigh. Bottom line is, what it means is that halacha l'maisa, Shmuel ordered the butcher to give Shaul the nicest piece of meat, which was to represent his newly anointed status. Incredible. Now, I just want to point out, isn't it fascinating that the Gemara 3 lines above started with the eulogy of Shaul, and then it went to the coronation, to the anointing of Shaul. Now, I'll say, what's the Musar Haskell? The Musar Haskell is that life goes by as quickly as a couple of lines of Gemara. Right? That literally, again, how long did it take us to get from the anointing to the eulogy, from the eulogy to the anointing? 3 minutes. I will say life goes by really quickly, and it behooves us to maximize the time that we have in this world. We do not know how much time we have. We do not know how long Hakadosh Baruch Hu should give us all arichos yamim v'shanim, but none of us know how long we have, which is why we have to make sure to maximize every single moment, because it goes by keref ayin, like the blink of an eye. Incredible. Let's go back to the Gemara. So remember again, the Gemara said, back to the Mishnah. So a woman should not be alone with an akum. The Gemara says, all right, but my asking about, what are we talking about over here? So if you're talking about that one woman should not be alone with one akum, okay, you can't do that with a Jew either. The kavasa gabi Yisrael mishari vatnan lo yisachid ish echad im shtei nashim. We'll say there's halacha v'yichud. What does the halacha v'yichud mean? The halacha v'yichud is even one Jewish man can't be alone with one Jewish woman, and one Jewish man can't be alone with two Jewish women. So in other words, obviously, if a Jewish man and a Jewish woman can't be alone, obviously then a Jewish woman and an akum can't be alone either. Amud beis ella b'tlasa. Rather, even with 3. As we'll say, in general, the halacha is, right? The halacha is that, for example, 3 people, there's no yichud, right? 3 people, there's no yichud. In other words, 2 men and 1 woman, right? 2 men and 1 woman, there's no yichud. So the Gemara says, but that halacha l'maisa, by an akum, that would still be a problem. So the Gemara says, the kavase gabi yisrael beprutzim mishari. But 1 second, those numbers, so in Israel yichud is like this: 1 man, 1 woman yichud; 1 man, 2 women yichud; 2 men, 1 woman not yichud, right? But even all of these numbers are only with people who are moral. If you have people who are exceedingly immoral, then even with these numbers, there's an Isser Yichud. The Gemara tells a story. Vatnan, aval isha achas misyachedes im shnei adashim. 1 woman is allowed to be alone with 2 men. From Rabbi Yehuda or Shmuel, lo shana al b'ksherim. That's only assuming that people are kshirim, right? Proper moral individuals. Prutzim afilu asara namilo. But I will say, people are known to be immoral. Then even a group of, the logic over here is that once you have a group, people are going to be reticent to engage in immoral behavior. In other words, I'll do immoral stuff. Right? When will I do immoral stuff? When Oh, no one knows the answer to this, right? I don't know what else, right? Again, when I'm alone, no one else is going to see it. If there's a group, I'm not going to engage in immorality. Okay, well, I know such tzaddikim. I'm away for a couple of days. Everybody became Bali Tshuva. Incredible. So again, if no one else is going to know, so I'll do it, right? But lamaisa, if you have a group of immoral people, then obviously all bets are off. The Gemara tells us it's a pretty wild story. The Gemara says, Maisa haya. The Gemara tells a story about it. What was the story? There was once a group of 10 people, and what did they do? They wanted nine men or 10 men and one woman. They wanted to commit an Avoda with this one woman, and what did they do? So listen to this. They staged a levaya. They pretended that she died. Remember, the cemetery was often outside of the town. They carried out her on a funeral bier, pretending to bury her, take her out to the outskirts of the city to commit an act of immorality. So what do you see from here? First of all, shkayach under determination. That's a lot of logistical planning, right? That's a lot, right? So some people say, but you do see, by the way, tremendous Mr. Haskell, when people are committed to accomplishing something and they put their mind to it, they can get the job done, right? Which is pretty incredible. To stage a levaya, right? And get there, right? Coordinate everything over here. Misaskim is involved, right? Everything, Chevra Kadisha, right? Everything in order to commit one act of znus. It's pretty incredible. Imagine if you put your mind to good. Why do I put your kochos to go? What you could accomplish. But the point over here is that lamaisa, even if you have a group, if they are immoral, so all bets are off. So what's the pshat? The Gemara says, lo tzricha beishto imo. So what's a very interesting halacha? The halacha is like this. Normally, 2 women and 1 man is yichud. Except if one of those women is his wife, then ultimately, again, there's no yichud. Why? Because the assumption is that a wife will prevent her husband from doing anything illicit. So the Gemara says, Ovid kochavim beishto imo. Ovid kochavim ein ishto mishmarto. Va'Yisrael ishto mishamarto. So we'll say, here's the fundamental difference. By an akum, whether his wife is with him or not, it doesn't make a difference because the wife of an akum is not going to prevent him from doing anything illicit. Rashi points out over here, why won't she prevent him? Because if he does something illicit, that gives her the license to do something illicit. But by a Jew, his wife prevents him ultimately, again, from doing anything inappropriate. So we'll say, by the way, it's pretty incredible, this lashon of beishto, by Yisrael ishto, mishamarto. We'll say a good wife prevents her husband from making terrible mistakes. You know, this is Rashi and Bereshis, right? Where Rashi says calls Chava an ezer kenegdo, right? An ezer kenegdo, which literally means a helpmate opposite him. And Rashi says zacha ezer, right? If a man is worthy, then his wife will be a helpmate. Lo zacha, if he's not worthy, kenegdo, she's going to be opposite him. So in other words, if a man is worthy, he'll have shalom bayis. If he's not worthy, he'll have machlokes. So I had a Rebbe who once said something beautiful. He said, the truth is, if a man is really virtuous, right, zacha, ezer. Right, but even if he's truly a tzaddik, even when she is kenegdo, he's still zacha. In other words, in a good marriage, a husband will understand that even in times when his wife is opposite him and his wife doesn't agree with him, more often than not, she's right. Bina yisera benashim. Often women understand things in a different way. And men come up with all of these ideas and all these calculations and all these insights. And chevra, more often than not, we're wrong. And in a good marriage, a wife knows what she's talking about, and a wife knows what is best for her husband, sometimes even more than the husband knows for himself. And all of us who have lived through this and could count on the number of digits we have on our hands and our toe and our feet, how many times our wives have saved us from making terrible life decisions. Things that I was so convinced was the right thing to do. But my wife knew better. And in the moment, I was resentful. In the moment, I was upset. In the moment, I thought that she was absolutely wrong. In the moment, I felt robbed of a life opportunity. But then in retrospect, right every single time. That's ultimately, the Gemara says, that's a special schus in a Yiddish marriage. In a Jewish marriage, Isha mishamar, ultimately a wife protects her husband from making bad decisions. But by an akum you don't have it. I have a seifuk lei mishum shvichas damim. But one second, what about shvichas damim? So both I said this whole discussion over here is all about this yisod. Is all about that a woman can't be alone with an akum because of immorality. What about the fact that we also said that being alone with an akum brings with it a risk of bloodshed? So isn't that an issue? Now we're talking about an important woman. So we'll say it's interesting, by the way, an important woman, Rashi points out over here, she has governmental ties. In other words, she's someone who you don't mess with. She's known. So because of that, there's no fear he's going to kill her. Rav Zvid Amar Isha Kli Zaina Aleha. So we'll say it's very interesting. So Rav Idi says, literally a woman, her weaponry is upon her, which is another way of saying that an akum is going to be more interested in violating a woman than killing her. So interestingly enough, the concern is always immorality. It's not bloodshed. It's not bloodshed, which is fascinating. So my benayo, what's the practical difference between them? So the Gemara says, it's a woman, literally again, who is important amongst men, but not important amongst women, which is another way of saying she is chashuva, she's important, but she's not necessarily attractive or beautiful. So Tanya Kavasi Ravidi Bar Avin, Ha'isha Fapisha Shalom Ima, Lo Tisyachid Ima Memesha Chashudan Ala Raya. So we'll say, so the Bryce seems to support Ravidi, that Lamaise, interestingly enough, there is not this same level of concern about bloodshed for yichud with an akum. Why? Because the akum is going to be more interested in the immorality with her than ultimately, again, he's going to be in taking her life. Incredible. Let's go back to lo yisachid adam imohem. So we'll say, so ultimately, again, you're not allowed to have yichud with an akum. Tanabanon. Yisrael, we'll say, fasting halachas. Or yisoshin is dami lo obed kochav l'madach. Now we'll say, I just want to point out also, I mentioned this when we started these sugyas. You have to understand that these statements of Chazal, these are not meant to impugn the dignity of an akum. These are reactive gemaras that reflect realities in which Jews were living. So therefore, do not be alone with an akum because it's sakanas nefashos. Do not, listen, I mentioned this before. I remember my uncle Zichron Livracha, his father, he used to have a Sudas Haudah on the second day Chalamayit every single day. Second day Chalamayit every day, right? Why do you have a when he was a kid in Poland, he was outside, a bunch of just Polish peasants, hooligans, whatever, picked him up and threw him into a well. Why did they pick him up and throw him into a well? Why? Because they could. Because the history of the Jew was that a Jew, you could do whatever you want to a Jew. He was a kid, a Jewish kid, 5 years old, playing outside. They took him, they threw him into a well. He should have died. Miraculously, he survived. He had a Sudas Haudah every year, second day Chalamayit. Again, this was the life of the Jew. This was the life of the Jew with the akum. This is what it was. So therefore, Chazal tell us, you have to be careful. So the Gemara goes right there. Tanabanan. Yisoshin is damin la'ovikam. Listen to this. So if you're traveling with an oved kochavim, so toflo liyamino, keep him on your right side. Keep him on your right side. Now, what's the idea on your right side? The assumption is it's a right hand's it's a righty's world, right? So therefore, again, what happens if he's on your right side? So therefore, again, if he tries something, you have your right arm there to be able to defend yourself. Rabbi Shmuel Silber, toflo liyamino, b'makel toflo l'smolo. If he's carrying a sword, if the akum is carrying a sword, keep him on your right. Right? Keep him on your right. Ultimately, again, because therefore, if he's on your right, you could prevent him ultimately, again, from drawing a sword. Because his sword will be on his left, and therefore, if you see him reach for a sword, you could stop it. If he's holding a staff, that staff is going to go ahead and be in his right hand. Keep him on your left. Because if you keep him on your left, ultimately, again, you could see the staff coming, you could prevent it from coming. If you're ascending a hill together or going down, whatever it is, now always make sure that the Yisrael should never be lower than the akum. Rather, again, the Jew should always have the height advantage. Do not bend down in front of the akum. Why? Lest he smash your skull. Again, I will say, I just want to point out again, this is Chazal giving advice for how to live in a hostile population. This is what you have to do. You have to be on guard. I will say, we know you have to be on guard. This is the reality in which we live, the reality in which the Jew has always lived for 2,000 years. And again, the great source we have to be able to recognize how much this entire discussion is changing about the Jew. Like we said before, the Jew not only have to be living on the defensive or on the defense, but also living in offensive. Okay, ultimately, again, if the Akum asks you, where are you going? Where are you going? It's very interesting. Wherever you're going, don't tell them your exact destination, but rather tell them you actually plan on going further than you're actually going. Yaakov Avinu le'Esav harasha, because this is what Yaakov did to Esav. What did Yaakov do to Esav? D'chsev ad asher avo el Adoni seira uksiv Yaakov nasa sukosa. So it's not even for today, but interestingly enough, right when Yaakov and Esav meet. So remember again, so Yaakov said to Esav, Esav wanted to travel together. Yaakov said, no, we're traveling much slower. I'll meet you in Seir. Now in reality, Yaakov never had any intention of going to Seir, right? Ultimately, again, where was Yaakov going to? Yaakov was going ultimately again to Sukkos. But what did Yaakov do? Yaakov told Esav he's going much further because he figured he's buying himself some time, because if Esav was going to attack him, Esav will wait until Yaakov is further along in the journey. But by the time that Yaakov would already be along in the journey, by the time that Esav would already be ready to attack, Yaakov would be safely ensconced in his destination and avoid any type of attack, ultimately, again, from Esav. So therefore, again, the Gemara understands from this is a good eitzah. If you're traveling with an akum and he asks you where you're going, always tell him you're going further than you're actually going, buying yourself some time before he attacks. So we'll say, Rashi HaKadosh says, Yaakov one day will come to Seir. When will Yaakov come to Seir? Mashiach. The day will come when Yaakov will bring the fight to Esav. That day will come. When Mashiach comes, Emir Hashem, and Yaakov becomes the dominant force in this world, and Mashiach fuels us ultimately again in the war and bringing light to this world. Halavai, we should be Zoch Emir Hashem to see that journey to Seir. Meher B'Yameinu. Shkach Abosai. All right, Chavran Zoom, have a great day, everyone.